Hello, everyone. For some of you, this is the third time hearing me say this. This is the Wassaic Project's featured artist talk with Madeline Donahue. I am super excited for this talk. This is our sixth and final of the featured artist talks we're hosting in support of our 2020 summer exhibition. The summer exhibition is available online and in book form. It is officially out in the world in people's hands. It is available at wasaicproject.org/2020 summer exhibition if you'd like to grab a copy on your own. Enough of that. This is Madeline Donahue to my left. She might also be to my left on your screen, or maybe not. I don't know how Zoom works. In any case, Madeline is a Brooklyn-based artist. She's both a painter and a ceramicist and a drawer. She was in residence in Wassaic back in May of 2019. That was when we first met, and I interviewed her then. It was really great to talk then. You were actually, Madeline, my first interview that entire summer. So it was interesting to go back and read our interview and be like, wow, that was such a great way to start off that summer series of interviews.
Right. Good way to
sorry, can you say that again? You were cut out for a second.
Good way to get to know somebody.
Yeah, it's always a weird first interaction with someone, but yeah, thank you again for that. I'd like to just sort of jump right in. Madeline, we were talking a little bit before this call started, and you were talking about how sort of the Bathers series of work that you produced was in some ways your entry point to your larger body of work about the intimacy of motherhood. I'd like to pull up one of the Bathers pieces that is actually in our summer show. And can you talk to me a little bit about the development of that piece in particular?
Sure.
Pull it up. Here we are.
Yeah, so as a whole, over the past couple of years, my work has been about the maternal body and the intimacy of taking care of another person, specifically taking care of my small children. And I started this work really by looking at my own body and thinking about my own body, thinking about like societal expectations of women's bodies, especially after giving birth, and really, like, I think my concept of what my body would be like after having a baby is that it would be destroyed and like worthless, and like the shelf life of my body was whatever happened before having a baby, and then after that I may as well just like give up and go hide somewhere. And I was really surprised at how strong I felt and how capable I felt, and actually how amazing, like how much more I was able to love how incredible the human body is. And so I started these works, actually they started with the ceramic works, and the ceramic piece is also, there is a ceramic piece that's also in the show that I made at Wassaic, which is about, this is about a little taller than a blender. Like I actually made it in the schoolhouse kitchen, so it's like, it's a little smaller, it's a little taller than like a kitchen appliance. Yeah. And just thinking about there's some humor in my work, and a lot of what I'm doing is like poking fun of the pressures, like the pressures of the perfect body. And here, like the breasts are flapping forward with the motion of like jumping through the wave. For a while I was kind of obsessed with this idea of like the body flowing with water, and using water and movement to keep the body flowing and keep my figures moving, because especially like as a mother of small children, like you don't really ever have time to sit down. So kind of thinking about the humor of that, and like the humor of the way the body moves, and all of these things that we try to hide, like stomach flaps, and like cellular, like the back of this sculpture, which I don't think I have in this slide presentation, has like cellulite marks. And I'm kind of using the glaze and using drawing in the sculptures to like create these imperfections and kind of poke fun at them instead of trying to make an ideal form.
Yeah, that's actually something I wanted to talk about more broadly. Can you sort of use what you just said as like an entry point into talking about how you think of the role of texture in your ceramics? Because that's, I mean, that's what I particularly love about your ceramics is like the attention to the texture of various details. And this one, it is like, it comes through in the wave, but there are plenty of your other sculptures, like, for example, the other sculpture we have in the show, where I really love the like contrast between the texture of the skin and the texture of the hair, which is all to say, can you talk about how you think about texturing the ceramics?
Right. Yeah. So also, comparing this to my paintings, like my paintings are typically really flat.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of thinking about painting things in segments. And I paint and sculpt in a 24-hour period. So um, that has a lot to do with like how the paint works. Like I'm painting wet on wet, which like often it's easier to like have this like flat appearance with it. And I painted with acrylics for a long time. And the ceramics are really fun in a way because at this point I've been working with clay for I think 2 years, so I have a better sense of like what will happen with the clay.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of this is like experimenting and literally kind of like slapping the clay together. And often I don't really know what's going to happen, but I use drawing to inform how I work with the clay. And so what's been fun about the sculptural work is that all the texture comes from drawing and like using so like I have this scraper tool that I use for that hair texture and also for the water texture, and kind of like creating a language with texture. Like I have these few different tools that I like, and like I use an X-Acto knife, pencils, and then these scraper tools, which are like ceramic tools, and really just like roll the clay out into a slab and play with it, and it's really fun, and draw on top of it and then push them together and make these sculptures. So I have less control over the materials, and the glazing like falls into all of those crevices, creating this like really unpredictable texture that's fun to it like takes the control out of my hands and allows me to like experiment more and and like do things that I'm not really capable of doing in paint, or like I'm not doing in paint right now.
Mm-hmm. Great. I'd also like to talk about, I actually kind of want to re-ask a question that I asked you a year ago, because I wonder if you have updated thoughts on it. The question was about how you relate to the frame of a painting versus the framelessness of a ceramic. So one thing that I really like about a lot of your paintings, and that's, I think, the case in this painting in particular, is how the bodies in the piece usually always really fill up the space of the frame and are like rubbing up against the space of the frame. The way you talked about it last year was you said you want to try and portray this bouquet of a relationship. Can you talk, do you have updated thoughts on that? And I guess to open that out more broadly, can you also talk about what it's like, what it has been like to add ceramics into your practice where there isn't so much of a like quote unquote frame that you're starting with established?
Yes, I do. So there are actually some pieces in the slideshow that might
Wonderful.
There's one called, if you scroll down about halfway, it's sorry, past it. So if you go back up again, it's like a yellow, this one, yes.
Here we go.
14, 15, and 16. So yes, so there are two things I've been thinking a lot about that. So one of them, I think the thing I didn't really realize living in New York, we've been in Connecticut for the past 6 months, and I've had more physical space. I bought a kiln. So rather than like waiting for somebody else's kiln time, I've been able to like really work as much as possible with clay. And I think a lot of the compression of the painting has to do with like making a bouquet, like thinking about the canvas as an arrangement. I also have been working on small canvases in the past couple of years because the size, like like 11 by 14 and 16 by 20 is a size that is more intimate and makes sense with the work that I'm like the subject matter of the work fits a smaller canvas better. And yeah, I'm like approaching the canvas like the way you would try to make a flower arrangement, and I'm trying to like fit the composition into this like small space. And I don't think I realized how much living in a compact city informed the way I was thinking about the content of my work.
Interesting.
And so this sculpture, so one of the things I think about when I make sculptures and paintings and drawings is like, painting has existed for thousands of years. And in a sense, sculpture and drawing have too, but painting is this like kind of exalted, like extremely high honored medium. And a lot has been done with painting. So a lot of people find it difficult to push painting to a new place.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one way that can be done right now is to make work about motherhood and like these experiences that women have. Motherhood is not the only one, but there are all of these. The female perspective is there's like an open window for women artists making work right now, because there hasn't been a lot of attention paid to women throughout art history, and so it's kind of this amazing time where you know, as a woman, you can make something your own and fit it onto a canvas, and it exists in this like historical framework. Sculpture is literally visible in a 3D arena.
Mm-hmm.
So I can take something like this sculpture, which I haven't painted. I drew a quick sketch of it to make this sculpture, but it doesn't really exist as a drawing or a painting. It just exists as a sculpture. And if you show the other detail, it's like a round 3D form that has all of this texture and tells a story with the form as much as it does with like the figure and the story of like holding, you know, like holding a breastfeeding a child while you're also holding another baby, and like containing that all inside of your clothing or your body, like using clothing as a metaphor for like this like containment of like caring for a family, and this like, I don't think that this would necessarily make sense as a painting, and the texture in the sweater might be kind of like unnecessary in a painting, but as a sculpture I could add more whimsy into it, because of like the actual sculptural form, like the all of the fluff of the sweater and that kind of stuff. So when I'm making sculptures, I'm thinking like, first of all, I'm like outside of New York. So also, if you show a couple of the new, like the pieces right at the top, my sculptures and drawings have kind of started to exist like in a greater context of the world. So this is a recent painting, and this is kind of more like the work that I've been doing in the past year and a half, where it's like a compact, intimate experience. But then I think the next 2 or 3 images, there's more going on, and the figures are existing like in the world, and that comes from being like in a town where like I literally have more space to exist. So there's another sculpture with like a picnic scene, like on a blanket, this one, and like I literally was going out in the front yard and like throwing out a blanket and just kind of, you know, wrangling with my kids, and just kind of loved the image of it. And I could do that in Brooklyn, but it wouldn't have really, everything in New York is so condensed that I've really been thinking about like my body and my children's bodies and us like together in this really close-knit space. And being outside of the city for the past few months has really kind of like opened my work up to creating these like motifs, I guess, that haven't existed in my work before. And I think I just would have felt a little like inauthentic if I'd done this without having experience like being out in nature. Like nature's definitely kind of taken over in my work a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Like my work is really intuitive, so I have kind of instinct about like what's authentic and what is maybe like derivative or like stuff I kind of work out in drawing. Like I might have an idea and then feel like this isn't actually my drawing. This isn't actually my idea. How can I work through this to make it my own? I don't know if that makes sense, but
That makes a lot of sense. I want to be mindful of the time before we open it up for the audience's questions, but I do have a couple more questions before we get there. Since you've just recently returned to the city in the past couple days, I can't forget if you said, I'm forgetting if you said it was just yesterday or in the past couple of days. But how have you, what has that been like? Because it sounds like it was sort of great for you to be, in a way, in Connecticut and having that open up the practice in a way. What has it felt like to come back to New York now and not necessarily have that open space anymore?
Yeah, so I've actually been thinking a lot about my time at Wassaic, because where we've been in Connecticut is not very far from Wassaic. So I have this I've in a way I've been taking everything day by day and not really thinking too much about like what's happening and what's going to happen in the future, what's been going on. And luckily, like having kids kind of has kept me from thinking too much about like worrying too much about everything. But I have been kind of thinking about this whole experience as like a residency experience.
Mm-hmm.
There's been kind of a panic. It's like I thought that this whole coronavirus situation would help me feel less kind of manic about the time that I have to make work, because like time is so precious for making work like among your children.
Yeah.
But oh no, it says my internet connection is unstable. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine for now.
Yeah. But so I like it is really nice to have space, but I think anybody that lives in a big city, it's just so it's like you can't give up. I just am not ready to give up on the big city yet. So the whole time we've been there, we've been planning on coming back. Definitely thinking about it's definitely so luxurious to have space to have a studio, and I'd like to have that. I think it's nice to know that that's something that I'd like to have like in the next few years. But I also just love the city. I love like running it, like talking to people on the street as I'm walking home. And yeah, I mean, it's tough. I think the beauty of being in Connecticut is that we weren't so far removed from, we were in a place we'd been before.
Mm-hmm.
And my in-laws, we always had plans to come back. So I think it's been, I've been like trying to really take advantage of the time and the space while also planning to come back. But yeah, but who knows like what's going to happen in the future. But I think Connecticut's close enough that we could try to do, if we really need to have more space, we could probably try to find a way to do both, or
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. But yeah, I've loved it, but also I'm happy to be back in the city.
Wonderful. Okay, so it is 5:21 right now. So at this point, I want to open things up for people's questions. I didn't actually say much about the format of the talk at the beginning. This talk is going to consist of 20 minutes of conversation between Madeline and I, which we just had, after which we are opening things up for your questions in the audience for about 40 or so minutes of Q&A. So how this section is going to work so that we don't have people like talking over one another. If you have a question, use the raise hands function of Zoom, and then I'll see it, and then I'll be like, all right, you come off mute and ask your question, and then the other person hold on, so that we, again, don't have people talking over one another. Alternatively, you can just send a message in the chat, and then I can relay that to Madeline. And yeah, and you feel free to use me as a resource if there's any particular painting or piece that you want to look at. Just let me know and I can share my screen and pull that up on my end. Yeah, so does anyone have any questions?
This is the part where it feels like being in class. And I'm always tempted to raise my hand because
and ask yourself a question.
Could we also, maybe could we show the slides while people are thinking of questions?
Yes, absolutely. I think we can. I think that I might not actually be able to see incoming questions if I'm sharing the slides, but I can maybe figure that out. see. Oops. Okay, I cannot actually see incoming questions if I'm sharing my screen. If I had more intimate Zoom knowledge, I might be able to figure that problem out, but I can't do it. Oh no, I can't see the chat. Okay, we have a message from someone saying, I'm not sure how to do the hand raise function, but I do have a question. Great. Kaylin, can you just come off mute and ask your question?
Hi, Madeline. Hey, okay, so this question, I received this question in my graduate thesis several years ago. I think you might know, but for those listening, I also paint the maternal form, though much more abstractly than you. And I got this question, as I said in my thesis, and I now have, I've just thought about this question a lot and think about it when I look at other, other people making work about the maternal experience. And I now have my own answer. At the time, I didn't really know. I kind of like, it was one of those questions that I was like, oh, well, I don't know. And I didn't really know how to answer it. But just interested to hear your response. So what they asked me was basically like, where's your husband in this? And part of the reason I thought of you in asking this question is because I've heard you talk about your work before when I interviewed you, and you talk about you and your children as being sort of these characters. So it's not always just that these are self-portraits or like, literal scenes from your life, although they sometimes are, but that you've kind of characterized yourself as like, this isn't necessarily Madeline, but it's a mom who's going through these things, these experiences, and these are small children. And so yeah, just like wondered your thoughts about, like, have you ever thought of including your partner in the work, or is there a specific reason that you never do? Or do you also not really like that question in the same way that I didn't really like it when I was in grad school? Just wondering your thoughts.
Yeah. So I've actually been getting a lot of that recently, not from like the greater public, but like from people in mostly like my husband's family or like friends of his. So number one, so the way I found this work is, I was making like figurative, so I spent like 20 years painting portraits, and my best friend is on this Zoom, and she like was painted a bunch of times. And I did paint my husband probably 3 or 4 times, like huge paintings of him. So I kind of feel like I got that out of my, like I've kind of painted every single person I know. And I did it for like so long that I got kind of sick of it. And I also did self-portraiture, like I did self-portraiture while I was doing that and got so sick of like doing like self-portraiture, but I was doing it like as an exercise. And I kind of realized recently that I'm like essentially back into self-portraiture, but it has a completely, there's the pressure of like reality is out of it. And anyway, so I got to this work because I feel like I was making work that wasn't honest to my own experiences. And I don't want, and I think I said this to you, I don't want to pretend like I know what anybody else's experiences are like. And specifically like I'm thinking about like racial stuff and like issues of gender. Like I can have empathy for other people, but as a cis white woman, for me to paint other people, especially like imagined images of other people, just seems really offensive to me. And like really, like it seems like it can be coming from a good place, but it ultimately, like my privilege provides a sort of ignorance for me, and I can't pretend like I know other people's experiences. So it's become really important for me to really like focus on my own perception and not put other people into it, which also is like my children, it's like my children are in it, but I'm really not painting them. I'm painting my interactions with them. And I also like know that this work will like probably has a shelf life. Like it probably, there's going to be, I also talked to my daughter a lot about it, and she's been like a participant in what's happening. And I also don't think I'm depicting my children in a way that's like offensive, or, you know, there are all kinds of complications with painting anybody other than yourself, or like your own perception. And I'm kind of like obsessively thinking about that a lot. The other thing is, like, so I don't know my husband's perspective. And I think anything, like including him in my work wouldn't be my own experience. And I also I also feel like, especially like love relationships are really, I just got my internet's freaking out on me, but you guys are still here. I also got, I also feel like love relationships specifically are so vulnerable and so precious, and are not like, they're not like, it's like there's this whole thing on social media about like people who have, women who have really popular accounts, and their husbands like don't want to be a product, or like don't want to be content for their social media accounts. And like my husband's life isn't like content for my work. And I think that things could change, and like we could be in a different situation where I'd like have a situation that would be appropriate for him to be in. But so far, like and also this work is like really new, like it's only 2 years old, and the current like kind of like whatever role I'm in right now is really only like a year old. So I don't have, like, I'm still kind of thinking about processing my own experiences, and I haven't had time to really think about him in the context of my work. He's also like a very private person. And like I don't think that he would really want to be like a participant. And like Jenna Gribben, for example, like her partner is like full force in her work, but my partner is not somebody who wants that kind of attention. And I think like those things are kind of going through my head as I'm like making the work. Yeah, super long answer.
Thank you.
Can I jump in and ask a follow-up, Madeline? So one of the things you said in there was really interesting to me about how you don't want to include other people, like how trying to like inhabit someone else's perspective is sort of a line that you don't want to cross a lot in your work. And I'm wondering how you then relate to like art historical figures who often are projecting their thoughts on particularly women's bodies in their work. You have a few of those actually in the slideshow you sent along for the talk. Not to put you on the spot to just talk about old Cezanne and Picasso paintings, but I'm wondering if you have thoughts on like how you're reorienting your relationship to bodies in your work, and particularly working with your own body or the bodies of your children in your work, given this history of like men projecting their thoughts on women's bodies in
yes,
work.
that is like 100% like where this work comes from. So growing up, I thought I would like turn into a man. I never imagined myself as like a woman artist. I imagined myself like as Picasso or like as Matisse. Like I would be living in an estate in France and painting by the time I was like 70. That was just the way it was gonna go. This is Dali, and this is a little boy there, or these little cherub figures are called Emerini. And I found this when I was pregnant with my son, and I thought that was so great because the other thing is like my work, like the color palette of a lot of my painting is like very, like I intentionally use like kind of Valentine-y colors, like blues and pinks that are like cold, like the colors of like blood and skin and like, you know, like what you'd think of love colors would be, but they're like really cool on the spectrum. So there's like a contradiction there. And I got a lot of people who said that like I was painting my daughter, and I thought it was funny because I've never actually like included her sex, or like I don't paint her vagina or anything. It's like I'm also like really trying to be careful to not like sexualize my children, which I don't even know if it's possible to not sexualize children. But speaking of, but or I guess that's a woman's. But so I love all of these classic. I love these images. I think they're beautiful. I do think that like, I think you can love something and also be critical of it. And so right. So spending a lifetime looking, or spending like, 30 years looking at these images and really feeling connected to them, but also feeling kind of offended by them, is where I got to this place. And like understanding that, so also the thing that's weird about these is like, I guess the idea is before running water, people would bathe out in public. I think that's the idea. And so these painters would go and like paint women bathing at the like at wherever. Like I think the Cezanne, the first 58, slide 58 is like a group of women bathing to like clean themselves, which is just so voyeuristic and creepy, but I guess was like considered socially acceptable. So like I took this, the love of these, like the beauty and the color of these images, to make that ceramic work that I think is like next in the slideshow. And then that evolved into the work with with my children that I've been making. So right. So I don't know if I answered your question, but it's like, yeah, I think you can be motivated by something and love it and hate it, like be critical of it, but also like, so that's Dana Schutz. So this is like so 64 is Dana Schutz. This is a painting she did after her son was born, which I'd seen like in passing when the show was up maybe 6 or 7 years ago, and then thought about it when I had my child. So and also like, I think before I had children, I'd heard of people, like there are kind of these complaints that parents have about difficulties with like raising children, and I'd had them kind of in the back of my head. And then when I actually like had experiences like that, it was easy to kind of see them as like funny experiences rather than painful. So like, so the following two slides, 65 and 66, are like my kind of like balancing act of showering with and like kind of, the like lifestyle of having people need you and love you. And right. And like, so my experience has been that it's been a really kind of joyous experience, not necessarily a complaint. Like I don't think of my work as like a complaint about parenting or like caring for another person. The other thing is like, it's been interesting. I think I've said this to both you, Joe, and to you, Kaylin, but I think it's been interesting that like, as the work becomes like more autobiographical, more and more people can relate to it. And that really kind of blows me. I don't really understand that, because like I've had a lot of people who've had like parents who are sick with cancer, like reach out to me and say that like, it's just like the idea of like caring for somebody else. Like, I don't think you have to be a parent necessarily to relate to that. But yeah.
Thank you. That totally answers my question. I feel like I could ask like 5 follow-up questions, but someone has a question. Bonnie Paisley Scott mentioned or said she had a question in the chat a while ago. Feel free to ask it.
Hi, thanks. I briefly turned my video on here. I had a question about color and your use of color and how it's translating from the oil to ceramics, and how you feel about the role of color in both of those mediums.
Right. So ceramics, I use low fire ceramics, which have a broader color palette, which has something to do, which Emily Ross could probably tell us about, with metals being fired. For some reason, high fire glazes don't have a very broad color spectrum, but low fire do, and low fire is what mostly like teachers use with kids. So I'm really attracted to color. I kind of like follow my intuition about color. I did have like color training, I guess, in high school. So I think I have like, that's kind of like what I'm pulling from. But I'm really I grew up when Impressionism and Post-Impressionism and Modernism were kind of like really hot in museums. And I grew up in Houston, where we had access to a lot of contemporary art and a lot of Impressionism, Post-Impressionism. So I think that's kind of where I got like my, where I was imprinted with like what my color interests are. And then there, I've just, like with my painting, I just decided to limit my palette because I don't have a lot of time to work in the studio. So when I get into the studio, I don't want to sit there and like think like, oh, what happens if I add green here? Is it going to ruin everything? Or like, and I'm working with wet and wet paint, and I'm finishing everything in a day. So I'm making color choices with oils, like the limitations of oil as a medium help me make these color choices. And it's been kind of fun to limit the palette. And I love like primary colors, yellow, red, and blue. So I've like picked these blues and reds, and then I'll throw in like a little bit of like neon yellow or like lemon yellow, something that will like add a little flash of color to these like reds and purples and blues. Yeah, and I'm thinking deliberately about like, with the painting, it's specifically about like making colors that bring up this idea of like warmth and like love, like Valentine colors, like I said before. And then with ceramics, there are limited amount of colors. There may be 20 colors, which also is like a great control. So I don't have a lot of control. So, and I also don't really know what they're going to look like when they fire. So it's kind of like blindly coloring something, like building something and then kind of blindly filling in with color without really understanding what it's going to look like afterwards. So yeah, those are like, that's how I make my color. I'm done.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
We have another question from Tristan. If you could take yourself off of mute and ask it, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Hi, Tristan.
Hey, Madeline. Great to see you.
Yeah.
Okay. I showed up a little late, so sorry if you talked about this already. I was just, when you answered another question earlier, you were talking about your daughter being a participant, I think you said, in the work. And I was just wondering, like, how, if you, in what way, like, are you able to, like, communicate with her about, or, like, talk about the work and, like, some of the drawings and some of those ideas? And does she, like, tell you she likes them or doesn't like this or something like that? And how does that relationship work between you two?
Yes. So she kind of identified herself in the work when she was like a year and a half old. Like when she started kind of vocalizing, like maybe closer to 2, right around when we were at Wassaic. So like a year and a half ago or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I hadn't really thought before. And at that point I was using this like baby image. Like it was just like a kind of a baby that was like repeated. So it was like a more broad, I guess like less specific. Recently she's like become like a more maybe obvious character in the work, but she pointed herself out and then like would kind of tell me the story of the painting, and then I would ask her questions like, how does this make you feel, and like what do you think of it, and do you like it or do you dislike it? And she's like, at this point she's very proud to be included in it. And I think like I did my grad work when she was a baby, and she I don't like paint around my kids because I'm using like oils and turpentine and stuff, but I had her in the studio a lot, and she like came to studio visits, and she has been to like openings, and she did a residency with me at Wassaic. She's like been very involved in my studio practice, so she feels like she almost feels it almost like the way she talks about it sounds like she thinks that it's like her work too, like it's our work, which I think is like really interesting. Also because I think any practice you have, like any studio practice, every few months it's going to be completely different work. And you might not realize it at the time, but if you go back and compile it, especially like applying for residencies and grant money and stuff, you start to see like, oh, there's a pattern in this work I was making over this like specific amount of time. And so this work that I made with her, especially before my son was born, is this like capsule of time. It's like, I don't know, it's like a very specific representation of our experiences together. And I almost wish I had like more. I feel like it might, like, kind of feel like I'm gonna need to stop when she gets to be a certain age. But I am like open to talking to her about that because I don't know. There are so many artists who've depicted their children, and it's like you never hear about the children being upset about it. I think it's like really kind of like everybody wants to be depicted in work. Although, yeah, I don't know. It's a tough. We talk about it, but it is it's a dilemma. Yeah, I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, that's great. I look forward to how that relationship develops, especially with your son being born. Exciting. Thanks.
We have another question in the chat that you may or may not have an answer to. Francis Stewart says, I love your work, Madeline. When are you going to have a show in Portland, Oregon? Would be such a treat to see these pieces in person. Do you have a show in Portland queued up?
No, I don't, but
Okay.
but I'll work on it. It's good motivation.
If there are any Portland curators in this call, take note.
Yeah, but also that's like such a great motivation for making work, is like think about where you want it to be seen, and then just like, I don't know. I'm a big believer in like visualizing something. That sounds not like in a creepy way, but like, yeah, like
manifesting it.
Yeah. I'll send some spiritual whatever. I'll burn some incense for Portland. Yeah.
Although I don't know, I think the last thing that Portland needs right now is more smoke.
Sorry.
Yeah. Anyway, does anybody else have any other questions? I want to reopen things if people have questions. Since I think that raise hand function may just not be working, feel free to just take yourself off mute and ask it if you have a question.
Yeah, don't burn anything for Portland. Sorry, Bonnie.
If nobody has a follow-up question right away, I have a few more questions for you, Madeline. So I want to talk about something you mentioned earlier when you were talking with, I forget the person's name that you were talking with before, but something that was brought up at that point was about how you sort of see the figures in the work as characters in the work, and there's sort of this somewhat divide between them being like one-to-one self-portraits and characters of people, but also you mentioned that as the work has become more explicitly self-portrait-y or representational of your particular personal experience, that strangely people have been finding more entry points into it. Can you say a little bit more about that last piece in particular, that contrast between it being like personal to you and somehow giving more entry points to people that aren't you?
Well, so I said earlier that I spent all this time doing portraits of other people.
Yeah.
And I always got connected to Alice Neal, which was like, that's great. But also I often had people ask me to paint them instead of, like it was really frustrating because like I'd make this work, and then instead of the work like connecting to people in a way where they could see themselves in it, they would ask me to make them a part of it, which like it makes sense. Like if you're painting portraits, then it seems natural that people are going to think that you're open to like painting them too. But it's different to make your own work than it is to make work that people ask you to make. It's just like a million years apart from each other, like the two concepts. And I had a lot of frustration with that. Also, like I couldn't understand how making something that included a lot of people was so, also like portraiture, 15 years ago was like a dirty word. And so there was a lot of like, like especially as an undergrad, painting wasn't even popular. So I kind of was always like fighting to paint, and then having to like defend this idea of like what I was doing. And my portraits were also like very similar to what I'm doing now. They weren't like at all realist depictions. But I think that's gotten me, it's like I got really bored with that. I got really tired of like people asking me. It's like, it's almost like you feel like you're not being seen because people are asking you to see them,
Mm-hmm.
which is like, it was this interesting like mental exercise where I was seeing people and I was spending this time. And I think really the work was more about this process of like spending time with people to paint them. But then at the same time, it's like it never, and like nobody ever saw the work. They just saw the need to be seen or something, the need to be depicted. And I think that kind of informed like what I'm doing now. And yeah, it's like, I would never have guessed that making work that and like still my work, it's like my work is about, obviously is about my experiences, because that's really like at this point what I know how to like, and I also feel really confident about the work I'm making because I know it. And I also like the drawing, the ultrasound drawing, like I have a series of these because I've been like, I haven't really ever had childcare, so I've always like taken my daughter to the dentist for to get my teeth cleaned and like done these things that are like you kind of take for granted when you don't have a child. And so I've done this series of these drawings that might be paintings of like going to the dentist and getting an ultrasound with my daughter. These are obviously like very specific to like my life, but the way that I'm depicting them somehow takes me out of it. There's something about like creating a cartoonish representation of something where it adds a sense of humor. And so it's like obviously not a serious, it's like this isn't like, you're not looking at this picture or this, you're not looking at this drawing of an ultrasound and thinking like, oh, I need to like pray and bow down and like respect this experience, or I need to be sad. There doesn't seem to me to be any sadness here. It's more like ridiculous and like silly and maybe funny and maybe a little grotesque and like a little too much information. And that's and what making this autobiographical work has done is it's helped me to like get out of this like I was kind of raised to be like the perfect representation of myself to the rest of the world. And I think a lot of people are raised that way. And it's taken this experience and like this work to allow me to really like express these really grotesque, like really kind of weird and like things that I might not be comfortable talking about with my family, but I can make these images, and then I have a whole just like dialogue with like an art community about them, which is like really empowering and amazing. And somehow doing it through my own body opens that up to a larger group of people, because a lot of people have felt violated and like the whole experience of having an ultrasound is like kind of a violating experience anyway. And it's like everybody has, like people who've been through something like this, or like I don't know, it's like it can be violating. Also, like doing anything with a child can be really difficult, but it's also really funny. Like going out in public with two little kids is just like a circus, but it's also like really wonderful. I don't know what I answered your question, but yeah, it's like for some reason, it's like I've gotten more comfortable. So as I've made the work, people have pointed out that it's like so the thing that bothers me is if I'm like talking to somebody about my work and they kind of talk about my kids as if it's like a literal, like I didn't literally go to the art store and my son didn't literally balance off of my underwear while my daughter was bouncing off of his body. Like that didn't literally happen. And sometimes people will like talk about it, talk about the work like it's a literal representation of my life, and it's not. And that's like a little frustrating, not really frustrating, just kind of like it's obviously a metaphor, but I also, the more that people have like kind of connected me to it, I've also gotten more comfortable with that. And being comfortable with that opens me up to expressing things that are maybe a little more weird or like uncomfortable or gross or whatever people would think of all of those things being. So yeah, so somehow like connecting myself to the work has like freed it up in a way, which I wasn't expecting.
Wonderful. Thank you. That absolutely does answer my question. Totally. We have a couple other questions in the chat. Bonnie, it says that, do you ever see your ceramic pieces being installed in a wall, especially the relief-like sculptures, thinking about little niches and roadside shrines?
I love that. I haven't, it's kind of like difficult to, like when you make a ceramic piece, you have to think about how it's going to be attached to the wall, and that kind of takes the fun out of like making a piece. So I have made some pieces that attach to the wall, but usually the backing breaks when I'm firing it. But yeah, I think that's, yeah, I love that idea of like roadside shrines. And usually what I do is like I make a pedestal that fits against the wall, so the piece can exist on the wall and like sit on a little like small platform. But ultimately, I'd love to have a show where I have like a huge like pedestal table where all of the pieces are kind of like all together, which is kind of how I imagine them when I'm making them.
Great, thank you. We have another question from Amy Branch Lambert. They are asking in particular about in the art store piece. They're asking, is this a painting? It looks like markers or drawings. So just a materials clarification question.
Yeah, so that is a drawing.
Okay.
I haven't yet made that a painting. I might have talked about it like a painting, but yeah, that's a drawing.
So that's an interesting window into your practice. I think this is something that we talked about last year as well, but is your drawing practice pretty much exclusively like towards eventually producing paintings out of it, or do you ever see the drawings as like the completed pieces in and of themselves? Like, can you talk about the interaction between drawing and painting or ceramics in your practice?
Yeah, so drawing is kind of like the backbone of everything, and the more I've worked, the more I realize that like sometimes drawing is drawing, and then the ceramic pieces. So almost everything is a drawing before it's another piece, but sometimes I paint without drawing, and sometimes I build without drawing. So drawing's probably the most consistent part of my process. Yeah, and sometimes like I think the art store drawing, I kind of love it the way it is. And especially like the stuff that's like super detailed. I don't have a lot of fun painting like really detailed stuff into paintings. So I also think about having fun while I work. And it's like a lot of the more like intricate drawing stuff is more fun to do on clay because it's this like weird surface that's really unusual to draw on. And then drawing with colored pencil and marker on paper is really fun. And there's like no weight to it. Like I can't mess it up. Whereas with painting still feels like very precious. So I try to keep the paintings like really like, I paint with like a large brush, and I try to keep the paintings like really free and like open, and then try to have fun with like whatever material I'm using.
Yeah, the way you talked about it last time we talked was that I think it was an art school professor of yours who said, just like, you know what a bird looks like, so just draw a bird.
That was actually like, that was just me thinking to myself, like,
okay.
I kind of tired of like the tedium of, right. So I don't use any reference materials for the work. And that's probably why I have like this kind of like cartoony style. But yeah, it's like, I don't want anything to get in the way of me working. So I don't want to have to wait to print out a picture. I don't want to have to pull something up from the internet to use as a reference. I just want to work. So I have this like practice going where I can just like sit down and draw, or sit down and draw on the clay, or start painting without needing other things to get that might get in the way of like actually getting work done. My goal is to have a painting done when I start working. Like I start working, I'm going to have a painting done by the end of the day. I start working, I'm going to have a drawing done. I'm going to have a sculpture built. Like it just happens. Yeah.
I love that. That's so great. I feel like most artists I talk to don't think about things that way. And I feel like I could ask you like 10 more questions about that part of your practice in particular, but I want to be mindful of the time and open things up for any more questions that people have, since we only have a few more minutes left on the talk. So if you have questions, come off of mute and ask them, or send them in the chat.
I just
have a question.
I just want to say thank you to everybody for coming before anybody else leaves. It was really nice to see everybody. Yes. Hi, Emily.
Hi. I missed the first half, unfortunately, so you might have addressed this, but I've been, for obvious reasons, since you know me and that I love clay, been so excited to see you making more ceramic work. But I was curious how you're thinking about the flat ceramic work versus moving toward vessels and, like functional ceramics versus the kind of layering 3D ceramics, if you could speak to that.
Right. So like, why don't I make functional work, or am I going to functional work?
Well, you've been making a little bit of functional work, right? And that's like what I'm thinking of specifically, and like how that changes as a 2D artist, how you approach clay.
Right. So everything I make is slab based. So, so like for instance, so I started making like a dinner set, I guess, like plates and bowls and spoons and stuff. Mostly because at the beginning of, like, I think with a fine art education, you kind of feel really bad about doing anything that's functional. Or like the way I was trained, it was like functional is kind of this like dirty word. Like painting and functional artwork is bad word. But yeah, we live in this really amazing time where you can do whatever you want. And so I think eventually probably like my like narrative figure based conceptual work, I know like conceptual is not the right word, but like the stuff I'm doing on the whole will probably turn into some functional pieces. And right now, like since I don't really know how to build, like I made a pattern for a slab bowl because I couldn't find a good slab pattern online. For some reason, it's like hard to make a slab bowl. So I like spent all this time working through it. I found a way to make a slab bowl. So now that I have that pattern and I like have figured out like the craft of it, then now I'm like more open to being able to build on top of it in the way that I do with the other stuff. The thing that I've been a little frustrated about is like when you don't know how to do something, it's really fun to experiment. And then the more you start to learn about the material, you start to limit yourself by being like, oh, I can't actually do this because then there are all these rules about functional work where like if you do things a certain way, it can become kind of risky because it can't be cleaned properly if you're going to eat with it or whatever. Like if you do, like I think if I make functional stuff with my like figurative sculptures that you couldn't actually eat or drink off of them because they would like hold in bacteria and stuff. So that's kind of been getting in the way of me really like pushing what I'm doing. But I've been making like plates and bowls as a way to like practice so that I can figure out how to like bring myself into it and like make them a little more evolved, I guess. But it is so much fun to do something you don't know how to do. I feel like that's like a sweet spot in an art practice is when you don't know how to do something, keep doing it because that's really like, if it's fun and if you don't know how to do it, you're probably going to make something really great.
Yeah, there's also a whole realm of like functional ceramics that are bowls and plates that you could never use for food, but they're still, so they're not really functional, but they like draw on those forms. So that could still be interesting, even if it's not like food safe.
I really love hearing that because I think as I've been making my plates and bowls, I haven't been thinking about how they look because I've just been playing. But I actually started making them because of, I think actually at the bottom of the slideshow, there's a picture of the Picasso plate that like inspired the stuff that I'm making. But you're so right. Like I haven't even thought of that I can just make stuff that doesn't have to be used. So the Picasso plate is on the left, and then like this is the first one I made is on the right, and then the bowls are the next slide down. But yeah, like they've been right. So they're not like that good looking, but they were really fun to make. And they probably don't really work as like things you can eat out of because of the relief inside. But yeah, but they're really fun to make. And you totally have inspired me to like just push it further and see what happens.
Great. Thank you so much. I want to just check if there's any more questions in the chat. Nope, we have no more questions. Just someone thanking you. The idea, Bonnie says, thank you, Madeline. The idea of having fun and working quickly in that way is very refreshing and inspiring. So you've inspired more people. I want to be respectful of everyone's time and close out the talk here. First and foremost, thank you so much to Madeline for taking the time to talk. This was really, really great. I feel like I could, continue asking follow-up questions for another 30 minutes, but I'll let you get back to the rest of your day. To everyone else, thank you so much for joining in for our 6th and final featured artist talk in support of our 2020 summer exhibition at the Wassaic Project. The exhibition formally closes tomorrow, but in the world of online shows, that honestly means very little. So the show will continue to be available, including Madeline's work, online for the foreseeable future. It is also, again, available in book form, which I have right here. Madeline's work is on the first quote-unquote floor. We decided to organize the show around the floors of Maxon Mills, just like any other year. And Madeline's is on the first floor. She has a full spread there. Check it out at wasaicproject.org if you're so inclined. That's enough of my spiel. Thank you again, Madeline. Thank you again to everyone else for joining.
Everybody, thank you.